When speaking about language development among hearing and deaf and hard of hearing children, we can see how it affects the development of the social, personal, and cultural aspects of their lives. First, we can see that the social development of hearing and deaf and hard of hearing children can be determined by their social settings or school settings. For deaf and hard of hearing students, depending on whether or not they are mainstreamed, can affect their social development. Sheets explains how deaf and hard of hearing students have a difficult time communicating with their teachers and peers when attending a dominantly hearing school, and how there is a difficulty figuring out the social expectations because of the communication barrier. Often they're denied of social experiences that promote their emotional and psychological well-being. However, Sheets describes that deaf and hard of hearing students thrive when they attend residential schools because they have access to peer groups, deaf adult role models, and ease of communication. Therefore, their social development will flourish. Second, the personal development of hearing and deaf and hard of hearing children will be established by the interactions they have. Their social interactions are dynamic and always changing with different experiences, which are key in developing their perception of themselves or self concept and how they feel about that perception in relation to others or self esteem. Along with those interactions, children begin to figure out how to identify themselves. Beginning in elementary school, all the way to college, children will develop a sense of their psychological self as well as their valued self, and then ultimately begin to compare themselves to others both internally and externally. Once they create an image of themselves and others, they will establish their own identity. Lastly, when looking into language development of hearing and deaf and hard of hearing students, cultural development is especially important for the child. The key to cultural growth begins with the child's family. Dr. Sheets clarifies that when a deaf and hard of hearing child is raised in a family with deaf adult role models, they are more likely to become immersed in the deaf culture. They will develop a strong affinity for language and community while developing a deaf identity. If a deaf or hard of hearing child is raised by a hearing family, the way of communication will determine how the child views their culture. Sheets explains that the degree of integration into the family structure is based on the parents' understanding of the ramifications of deafness, their communication beliefs, and their views and attitudes on what it means to be deaf, and that will determine how the child identifies themselves, or as having a hearing identity. Additionally, if a child's family is strong about using speech and sign language to communicate, the child understands the strengths and weaknesses of both deaf and hearing communities. Consequently, that child will address themselves as having a bicultural identity, meaning that they don't just identify with one culture, but with both.